oneness at all times. Well, what does that mean? That means that God can emanate not only one other being, but many, many other beings who possess equivalent qualities and are also complete. And yet, although he emanates so many complete units of complete consciousness and complete life, he does not become diminished in any way. That's the meaning of this mantra. It's a fantastic concept of God. And this is the opening mantra of the first Upanishad. Remember last night we were talking about the Vedas and Upanishads. The Vedas will leave you with many, many questions. So the Upanishads take up these questions one at a time. And the first question they take up is, what is the meaning of God? What is the source of everything? Om Purnam, the complete whole, the complete unit is the source. And even though so many other complete units emanate from him, still he remains complete and is never diminished. That's God. That's God. And that's what we experience. That's what we observe. When we look at the world, we see here's all these living beings, there's all these planets and stars, all these galaxies, everything is going on, and yet it seems like so much more can come without any limit. Seems like the universe is just expanding and expanding, and there's nothing stopping it. It's going on infinitely. How is that possible? Because God is the source. God is the origin. God is the complete whole of everything. And even though he can emanate, he could take everything that exists right now, the whole universe, and he could emit a second one, and a third one, and a fourth one, and an infinite universes, just like the one that we have now. And he would never be diminished in potency. He would still have infinite potency. That's God. So the Vedic idea of God, therefore, includes unlimited possibilities, ananda. And this is only the material world. In the spiritual world, there's even more possibilities because we're free of time. If time is no longer a factor, you know, everybody's done a project that had to be done at a particular time. And it's always a source of anxiety. And if I don't get it done on time, then it's going to be useless. And that's the nature of all material endeavors. Yeah? If they're not done in time, then you might as well not even do it. But in the spiritual world, it's not an issue. Because we're free to move around in time in the spiritual world. So if we don't have something quite finished, that's okay. Just shift time a little bit and go back. You know, we have so much more freedom in the spiritual world because all the possibilities are there. So our real existence, our real home, our real happiness is in the spiritual world. This material world is just kind of a reflection or a dumbed down copy of the original spiritual world. And when we live in that spiritual consciousness, then we're happy, we're free. We have complete knowledge, complete existence, complete love, complete happiness. Everything is there in completion. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachite Purnasya Purnam Adaya. Because God can emanate unlimited units. He's never short of anything. He's never running out of it. Purnam eva vashishyate. He remains the complete source, the complete balance, without diminution. So when we chant this mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, we are putting ourselves in touch with that source. It's just like when you have a radio signal. You know, how does radio work? We have a tower, right? And there's an antenna on the top. And then there's radio waves coming out from the antenna. And then we have our little radio set down here. And the radio waves come into our antenna. And then there's some electronics that like decodes the signal and we can hear the music. But how does that work? Well, it's really cool. It's called modulation. Modulation means that there's a carrier wave. Like that. And the carrier wave is at a particular frequency. But when we tune our radio, what are we really doing? We're tuning into this carrier wave. It's a certain frequency, like a certain sound. And then with amplitude AM radio, let's say we have some music going like this, like that. So what happens is this carrier wave gets modulated by this signal. So it goes like that. Basically, the information is encoded into the waveform by the transmitter. And then when our receiver picks it up, what does it do? It separates the two. Remember how we were talking about to be aware of something, you have to have separation? If they're together, if there's no context, you can't be aware of something. You can't be conscious. So there's so many radio programs going through this room right now, but we're not aware of any of them. Why? We don't have the receiver turned on to separate the signal from the carrier. Okay? So somebody might say, well, I don't see God. Where's God? Yeah, I don't see him anywhere. Yeah? It's said that God is present everywhere. Why can't I see him? Why am I aware of him? Because you haven't separated the signal from the carrier. God is there. God is everywhere. You're fully present. But because we didn't decode the signal properly, we're not getting the message. Okay? When we put our consciousness in the proper context, then we can decode the message. And how do we do that? By this carrier wave. First, the radio has to tune to the carrier, right? Before the radio can receive the station, you have to tune it in. So what we're doing when we chant this mantra is we're tuning our consciousness into the carrier wave that carries the message of God. And if we do that successfully, what happens is then we can receive that message in our hearts. The circuit's already there. You don't have to develop it. You don't have to create it. You don't have to get it from somebody else. All you have to do is tune in on the mantra. And when you tune in on that mantra, what happens is automatically it starts working. It's like the radio is there. It's just not plugged in. So you plug in the radio, turn it on, tune it to the right station, and boom, you get the message. You hear the music. So what we're saying is, when you chant a mantra, you're tuning into this message that's coming from the time domain, coming from the spiritual domain, from the higher dimensions. And you will be able to get the message that's coming that will give you the information how to live as a spiritual being, even in the material world. So, that's the story of mantras. That's what mantras are all about. There are many mantras. There's not just this one mantra. There are many, many mantras. And they each have their specific application. Just like there are different radio stations. Some of our music stations, some are news stations, talk stations, emergency stations, what have you. They all have different purpose, different programming. So the different mantras tune us into these different channels. First we have to learn how they work. They work by uncovering our original consciousness and tuning us into the carrier wave coming from the spiritual world that's broadcast everywhere, all the time. Like all God, all the time. So if we tune into this station, then we can detect this. So what's going on? When we get inspiration, who was telling me? Oh, you were telling me last night, Randy, about your idea about, the 3D laser projector thingy and all of that. And you were telling me, remember you were telling me, it's just coming through me. It's just, I'm just the instrument, and I'm getting this inspiration. And it's like time for this idea to manifest. We know this, it's a common thing that happens in the world, that several scientists will get the same idea at the same time. Isn't it? In the history of science, it's like there'll be a particular question, and several people will be looking into it, and all of a sudden they'll get the same idea right around the same time. So how do we explain that? It's that the message is coming. It's time for this thing to manifest. So who's going to pick up on it? So because you have the background, you're tuning into the carrier by thinking in that area of subject matter, then that message will manifest to you and you'll be able to decode it and you'll actually be able to build with the thing. Because you get the vision. How many stories are there of physicists, like, stepping onto the bus and getting this incredible epiphany of how things really work, or what's really going on? This is a very common theme in science, or what to speak of art. I mean, Mozart talked about that he would get a whole symphony